show it all. Hey, yeah, show it. Yeah, show it, don't blow it.
Friends, we are here today. I'm one of your hosts, Kent, with my co-host,
Mike.
And today we are welcoming the one and only Michael Roe from the 77s. We know him as Doc Love. Welcome, Michael.
It's a pleasure to be here. Outdoors. I've never done one of these outdoors, and I'm pretending to smoke a cigarette, but it's the cigarette that does the smoking. I'm just a sucker.
Michael, I know that you are pressed for time. It's certainly an honor to have you. I've got a lot of things I'd love to ask. I'm just going to dig right in, if you don't mind. So whether you're solo material or with the 77s, I've always been amazed. Or I mean, let's talk about the Lost Dogs, Kerosene Halo. You play bass with the choir in live settings. Michael, I'm amazed by the proficiency with which you play a variety of genres. If you don't mind, sir, please tell us who some of your musical influences are.
Wow, you got a few hours? Well, when I was little, I was an unusual child in that I was aware and cognizant of the birth of rock and roll. I was, I had my Kitty Golden records like every little boy had in those days. But when I heard Elvis Presley and Fats Domino, because my parents brought home a hi-fi record player, the one that's on that album High Infidelity by, who is that band? I can't think of them, but it was a...
Oh, REO Speedwagon?
Yes. On the back is my parents' hi-fi set. They brought that home in 1957, and the first record they bought was this album called This Is Fats, right, by Fats Domino. And once I heard that, I went from being just, a normal little kid to an obsessive child beating his head against the wall, listening and mimicking and singing along and trying to be part of it. Oh, my lovely wife is now providing me with a power supply. Let's all hear it from my lovely wife.
Thank you, Mrs. Roe.
Mrs. Roe, I love that. We never, Mrs. Roe, they used to call my mother that. It works, thank you, dear. So, and then they bought the 45 on Sun Records, Great Balls of Fire by Jerry Lee Lewis. Then they bought me Teddy Bear by Elvis Presley. And then my auntie gave me Hound Dog, which, I mean, all of this stuff had a real powerful effect on me. And I suppose this story isn't unique, except that I was extremely young. So if you considered that I was 3 years old in 1957 and became aware of AM radio and rock radio in the San Francisco Bay Area, started listening to it. But another thing that happened was it became a sort of civil war with me and my parents, because when they saw the effect that it had on me physically and mentally and everything else, it profoundly shocked them. They weren't prepared for it. And they thought, this isn't good. This is the devil's music. We have to take it away from him or try to control it. Well, the rest of my childhood and adolescence and early adulthood would be spent in that civil war with my parents, because they realized that, like it or not, I was going to become this thing, not just like it or dance to it or whatever. It was an interesting way to grow up, but like I say, I don't think my story was unique. I mean, if you listen to guys like Bruce Springsteen, who's fighting with his dad, telling him to turn that guitar down, and it's just a classic battle of a child and his parents. And rock and roll was something that was new. No one really knew what it was yet, and the impact it was going to have on at least my generation and a couple more after. I'm just so very grateful, because it was just such an exciting, thrilling thing to put those records on my little record player and have that sound come at me. It was not like anything else. And I just, it carved a path for me. And I'm really grateful for it, because eventually I had an older second cousin that played guitar really well, like Chet Atkins. He had that finger style Travis picking thing. And he would bring his guitar and amp over, when they'd have him and his wife over for dinner. And then afterwards, he'd set it up in the living room and start playing all this stuff. We played melody and rhythm with his fingers. And I was just spellbound by this. So when I was about 9 years old, my mom said, "Do you want to take guitar lessons from your uncle or your cousin Richard?" And I'm going, "Yes," So the neighbor lady gave us a Stella guitar with the strings were about this high off of the neck. It was like swinging 3 baseball bats. And I was crying and my fingers were bleeding and they got sore. And my mom said, you need to get in there and practice. I'm paying all this money. And if you don't practice, I'm going to take it away from you. So once again, I had this negative threat to do it, but they wanted me to play in church, of course. We were grew up in real strict Assemblies of God church, and there's a lot of good music in the church. So they thought, well, if he plays in church, we can kind of control him and maybe work this rock and roll thing out. Well, that did and didn't happen. I ended up becoming sort of a mixture of doing my own music at home and then playing in church. But then in 1969, I got a call from an older friend from the church who was starting a rock group at a Bible college up in Santa Cruz Mountains. And I was 15 at the time. They said, "We've heard you're good. We want you in the group." All these guys are like 21 years old. And I asked my parents if I could join this, and they said yes. And so one of the very first Christian rock groups ever, it was called the Brotherhood, we formed, and it was a big group. It was sort of like Blood, Sweat, and Tears, Chicago. They had horns and the whole thing. And I started writing originals for the group, and we made a little record. You remember the band, The Archers?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, well, Gary Archer, their dad, had a group. He started that group with his sons. And around that time, we did some gigs with them. We did gigs with the Danny Bells, Andre Crouch and the Disciples, and other real early Christian rock guys. Larry Norman was kind of starting then. And so I got to be a little bit a part of that scene. And we had youth groups, youth pastors who were bold, who would hire us. And it went pretty well for a while. And then my parents wanted me to quit because some of the guys had some political views they didn't agree with. And I was coming home and spouting all of these sort of communist ideas, right? Well, we got to get them out of that now, So one of the very last gigs that we did was up here in Sacramento at they call it a river raft race kind of thing. It was an annual thing on the river where you get all these people doing rafts, and they had, for some reason, the promoter was a Christian and had all these Christian bands, and we were one of them. So my parents called some pastor friends of theirs from up here to come and sort of pronounce judgment on what we were doing. They thought, if we can get this pastor to sort of nip it in the bud, then we can get him out of this communist group. So they came to watch the show, and at the end of it, they said, "Well, Mike, we want you to talk to this pastor. He's going to give you his opinion." He says, "Well, Mike," he said, "this is great entertainment, but you will never be able to use it to spread the gospel." Well, that was it. That was the kibosh for my parents, and they pulled me out of the group. That man would live to eat those words, because it wasn't long before his wife started a Bible study that turned into a church based around rock music for youth. And he was a traveling evangelist at the time, and he was forced to give that up and come home and pastor all these young people that were becoming Christians around art and music. So he ate some serious crow about that when years later, God called me to that church to be part of it. And it was that church, Warehouse Ministries, that birthed Exit Records, Charlie Peacock, Vector, 77, Steve Scott, RV in the Shadows, Robert Vaughn in the Shadows, and all that. So somehow God kept his sense of humor through all this. But there was a thread running through it that started when I was very small, and it ended up, coming to fruition in the 10 years that I spent on staff at that church, working in a studio and doing a record company. I learned all my skills that I'm using now. So in a nutshell, that is how it all began.
You don't need to die, and that's the reason why I'm looking in your eye and telling you that it's now or never.
Well, that's awesome, Michael. And now, forgive me if I'm not mistaken. You know, around the time of Scratch Band, before the 77s were the 77s, and you guys were Scratch Band. Michael, were you around that time? Were you also a radio DJ?
No, I was about to mention that in the story. When I first came to the Warehouse Church, they were involved in a syndicated radio production called Rock and Religion. And when it started in the mid-70s, it was mainly to spotlight contemporary Christian music artists. Okay. And what they did was they did interviews with them and featured their latest album. It was like an hour long or 30 minutes long. And they had, oh gosh, all kinds of people. I can't even think of all of them. I think their first guest was Daniel Amos, of all people.
Yeah.
They had Randy Matthews and Randy Stonehill, and the list goes on and on and on. It was a really cool show, and it was produced by a local disc jockey who had an ear for quality. It was pressed onto vinyl records, which was unheard of at the time. Most, religious programming was sent out on reel-to-reel tape, and the program directors liked this show because it sounded as good as or better than their current programming. So instead of running the old time gospel hour with who's the moral majority guy?
Is it John Hagee?
No,
No, Jerry Falwell.
Jerry Falwell had that
Yeah.
old time gospel hour.
Yeah.
There was different things like that because the FCC required a certain amount of religious programming per 24 hours for every radio station. So they were happy to air our show because it sounded better. And eventually, when I came on board, it changed because the writer and producer, Mary Neely, knew that I had a background in rock music and was a rock historian, rock trivialist, and had a large record collection. And she said, we could really branch this thing out, because she was getting tired of featuring the CCM artists because it wasn't really going anywhere. It's like it started to become a little boring. They'd done it for several years, and she wanted to explore the spiritual content in popular music, which at that time could have been anything from the Baha'i faith to Hinduism to Pete Townshend's interest in Meher Baba to, the Rolling Stones or Led Zeppelin's dabbling with, whatever darker things. And I was more than happy to jump into the middle of this and do the research and provide her with a lot of inside information. So then we started hitting up these artists, and we connected with journalists like Steve Turner, who was able to get us an interview with Pete Townsend, an exclusive for the show. And other people like that. We started interviewing, we managed to snag Ray Manzarek of The Doors and Danny Sugarman, the guy who wrote the book about Jim Morrison, No One Here Gets Out Alive. We went down to Hollywood and interviewed those guys. We did the Brothers Johnson, which was an R&B thing because they were Christians. Philip Bailey and from Earth, Wind and Fire. It became really fascinating. And when Kerry Livgren became a Christian, we went and interviewed him and featured his first solo album, that Seeds of Change. It was a lot of fun, and it was really informative.
So, Michael, let me ask you along those lines then. Now I came on board the 77s camp. I first heard a full album by the 77s. It wasn't until 1994, but the album was Pray Naked.
Yeah.
Once I heard that album, it sucked me right in, and I got the back catalog and got the forward from Drowning and onward. But I'd like to ask you, what you're talking about, the things that you've been mentioning, the 77s, you guys have so many themes running through your songs. There are relationship issue songs. There are life issue songs, the good, the bad, and the ugly. I mean, you know, to quote the song off of Tom Tom Blues, "Honesty," right? Give me honesty, and you've been honest about things. Here it is. But underneath it all, there seems to be kind of like, let me quote another Seven song. The bottom line is there's kind of a foundation of a Christian worldview. Should we construe the 77s as a Christian rock band, or was it always intended to be a rock band and that has Christian members?
Well, the only way to really answer that completely would be to start at the beginning of how the band got together and why. So when I first came to the Warehouse Church, while we were working on that radio show, they were also doing rock concerts every Saturday night. Okay, they'd been doing it for years, and they would have a contemporary Christian rock or pop artist come through. They had everyone from Isaac Airfreight doing a comedy act to Daniel Amos, the choir, you name it. I mean, everyone and anyone that they could get. And they wanted to publicize in a more dynamic way what they were doing on Saturday nights. And they thought the best way to do that is to put together a band that can go out and play at high schools during lunchtime, or colleges or youth authorities, wherever we can go, and let people know, hey, we're doing these concerts. You know, they were very evangelical in their approach, because they would have the concert and the pastor would get up and give a short sermon and have an invitation, and it was very effective, and it was quite popular in our community. But they thought if there was a physical representation of these concerts going around, it would be even more effective. So they said, we just need to scratch a bunch of people together. Just call it the scratch band. We're just going to scratch them together and throw it together. And I said, well, I only have one caveat. It has to be good, or I'm not going to do it, because I'm used to playing with world-class musicians. I'm not going to get up and do some stupid church band. And they said, well, no, we don't want that. We want it to be good. So they asked Jan Voles, who became Jan Eric, that's his middle name. They asked Mark Tootle, myself, a drummer called Mark Proctor, and Jimmy Abeg. Abeg got really busy, I think, with a different group at the time. So he dropped out. So that was the four of us. And at the time, another thing was happening. Steve Scott, as I mentioned earlier, had come over from England, and Larry Norman had produced an album of his called Moving Pictures, which has yet to be released. And Steve needed a backup band, someone to play these songs. So our first material was songs from Moving Pictures. And that was Different Kind of Light, which ended up on our first record, a bunch of other tunes that we don't play anymore. But we did all those, and then we wrote some songs too. We had Sharon McCall in the band at the time. She was married to Jerry Chamberlain from PA. So it was 5 pieces. Sharon dropped out after a couple months, but the 4 remained for the next 4 years. And we played every high school, every jail, every prison, every law school, every JC, every college. And it was relentless. I mean, we rehearsed all the time. We wrote constantly. And eventually, they made some connection with Word Records to give us our own label. Let's start a record label so that we can have a roster of artists and get distribution. So that was Exit Records. Now, at the time, the songs we were writing ourselves were extremely evangelical and sort of preachy and, full of hellfire and tarnation and darnation, like ping pong over the abyss. We wanted to get to save souls, and because it was part of that mission in the church, the group did start as an unapologized Christian band, for lack of a better term. But once we started the record company and realized that approach might work with some people, but it's probably going to fail a whole lot more with a whole lot more people. Why not have it be an artistic band that can influence the culture at large? And in order to do that, we need to take our cue from writers like Steve Scott and others who were writing, really good contemporary songs that had a strong Christian message, but not necessarily an overt one. So we morphed from this hellfire preaching thing to a more subtle approach. And then we started to take ourselves seriously as artists and thought, you know, this band's getting pretty good. We can actually be a real group and go out and play the real world and have a big influence on it for Christ, right? I mean, isn't it obvious we could do that? Well, we tried, we failed, but we certainly made a lot of music in the meantime.
Yes.
That label eventually got, through Word Records, they got their sort of secular influence with Amy Grant because she was selling a bunch of records for them. So, but every time we'd put our records out, they'd end up in the Christian bin, you know, like a Tower Records. Excuse me, I've got to quit smoking. I need another cigarette. Yeah, it was really frustrating because once you call yourself a Christian band or a Christian label, or you're associated with a Christian record company, even as a imprint, that goes before you and follows after you. So we could go play the gnarliest punk club in San Francisco. Everybody knew we were Christians before we even walked in there. They smelled it. It was all over us, you know. I can't explain that. All I know is that we were never going to get away from that. My wife is bringing me a wonderful glass of water because she hears me coughing.
Thank you, Mrs. Rowe.
No, Mrs. Rowe.
If you can, quick comment a bit on how the name 77s came about for you guys.
Well, before we made our first album for Word, we knew that Scratch Band was a crap name. We needed to come up with something that was more cool, more profound, and I wanted something big on posters that would be bigger than all the other bands. So we wanted it to be short, concise, and have something we could do a logo with. You know, I was thinking about marketing all along. So one night, Jan Voles had a dream, and he came to us the next morning because we had about 300 names. They were terrible. He says, I've got it. But he says, I'm not going to say it. I'm going to write it out. And he writes these two big sevens. And we both stared at it. And I went, that's perfect. Oh my God, that sounds like a really little, you know, like a spiffy little pop group from LA, but it's numbers. And it's also, you know, we thought of the, you know, that chapter in Daniel where it talks about, you know, the 77s, you know, this prophetic timeline where Messiah will enter Jerusalem, blah, blah, blah. You can look it up, folks. We were so thrilled by that. That's where that came from.
You guys certainly brought the goods, the great music. Let's talk about some of that art real quick. 1984, All Fall Down.
Yeah.
And, you know, the first album, Ping Pong, I loved it, 1982. And it was kind of a melting pot to my ears of kind of the new wave at the time, plus driving classic rock. And then All Fall Down, it leans a little bit more into the new wave vein, but Ba 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 Ba. It's a good example of this art. You guys cut a video for the song. There's a German spoken word which runs throughout the song, Die Schafe zur Schlachtbank geführt.
Yep.
Which means, Michael?
Oh, like sheep led to the slaughter.
So, you know, I mean, that made me look that up. You know, it's like, what is this? This is different. I had to look it up. Michael, whose clever idea was that to place that in the song? And who spricken Sie Deutsch? I mean,
that was Steve Griffith did the voice from Vector. I don't remember whose idea it was. I think it was mine, but it could have been someone else's. I don't know. The thing had a Germanic quality to it, and I was hoping to get airplay in Germany, which we eventually did because of that. Gosh, I don't know. Well, first of all, the song was about Mormonism originally. It was going to be called Utah, right? And it was about, you know, it has all that imagery about the burning in the bosom, you know, different more, you know, it was sort of a pot shot on Mormon theology. But after a while, I thought, I have nothing against Mormons. I don't want it to turn into that. I want this to be more universal. So I kept sort of some of that imagery, but shifted it to a, you know, following like sheep kind of thing. And that's why we ended up with Ba Ba. Yeah. You know, we believe because we felt it burning in our hearts, sort of like if it works, it must be good. If it's good, it must be true. You know, those kinds of slogans.
Right.
Welcome to truth, custom made.
Come in and have some lemonade.
Yeah, reality will readjust if we evade, you know, the issues that are pressing us, getting so distressing, but undressing and unstressing makes them go away. That was a nod to the whole thing about Joseph Smith, you know, creating the bigamy thing so he could have a lot of women. And, you know, we wanted to expose the darker side of that cult, you know, but, you know, the things, again, I thought that would limit its throw as for an audience. And neither did I. I repented of the idea of tearing down Mormons just to get a point across. I just thought this theme is way more universal. And that's what I ended up doing with the song. It was written by originally a couple of friends of mine. It had a different title. These guys that I wrote songs with in the 70s. And it was called Imagine Me. And it was a sort of a Supertramp. Remember Supertramp?
Yes, I do.
Breakfast from America. So it used to be called Bet You Can Imagine Me Without My Mask of Tragedy. We believe in the better in the heart, you know. And we were part of this songwriting thing with Songwriter magazine where we would send our songs in for critique, right? Mm-hmm. Well, I love telling this story. So we send this song in as is before it became Ba Ba. And we get a letter back, you know, and they're supposed to give you like a, you know, okay, here's what's wrong with your song. You know, the judges felt that it was this and it was that, or it didn't go anywhere. It didn't have a strong chorus, a strong hook, whatever. We get one page handwritten. It says, sorry, your songs and you suck. And I remember we opened that and my partner was really mad. And rightly so, he was mad because we paid for good advice and we got that. And I thought, you know what? We need to frame this. I said, I have a feeling that this is an omen. There's something about this that's telling us about what the music business is really like. And I said, if we forge forward in light of this terrible insult, not just your songs, but you personally suck. That guy probably had sat through 100 tapes that day, and that was probably the last one he heard, and it was probably so pitifully derivative of a popular group at the time, because this was 1979 that this happened. And he heard that and that stupid voice singing, nah, 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 you know, and he just, yeah, we did suck, and that song sucked. So it was my mission to turn that around because I knew that was a great pop song. I knew that the hooks, the melodies, everything about it, in spite of it being, I mean, you didn't hear Supertramp till I said it, right? Right. So basically, I wanted to redeem that situation. And so I asked Charlie Peacock, who was asked to produce the record. He let us have our own head on most of that album, but I wanted a couple singles out of it. And I said, Chuck, I know this is a hit. I said, I want you to produce it in your Charlie Peacock way. Use the drum machines and all the fancy new wave sounds. I said, I don't care what it takes. I want you to go and arrange this thing and make this thing snap. And he did. So he comes back with that, you know, that drum beat, that Lynn drum thing and that whole thing and all the parts. And man, it was great. So yep. It was a great collaboration, you know, all across the board, you know, 3 writers, 1 great producer, and our band just filling in the blanks, you know, and it got a lot of airplay. It even got played in Los Angeles by Rodney the Rock, you know, Rodney Bingenheimer, who called it a surf rock classic. It could have been a big hit, but, you know, we were on a Christian label. So
So moving right along, let's go to 1987's eponymous album.
Yeah.
It was highly lauded, rightfully so. It was awarded the 82nd placement in CCM Presents the 100 Greatest Albums in Christian Music. And it contained the popular song amongst your canon, The Lust, the Flesh, the Eyes, and the Pride of Life.
Yeah.
Wonderful song. You guys were also picked up by Island Records at this juncture. So, Michael, how did the signing with Island Records come about?
Well, the fact that people think we signed with Island Records is actually a myth. What really happened was this. The folks that were running Exit Records were always in touch with fringe people in the music business. And there was this guy named Lou Malia who was used to running record companies as president, and acting president, line president, right? He was in between jobs. He came up to Sacramento, befriended our CEOs, and got really excited about what we were doing and wanted to help us out. Well, while we were in the midst of all this discussion, Chris Blackwell, who's the owner and, you know, the legendary Chris Blackwell, who signed U2, calls up Lou Molly and says, I need someone to run Island. I need a president. And Lou says, great, but I have one thing. I'll do it on one condition. I met up with all these great artists in Sacramento. Will you sign them all or create some situation for them? And he says, well, I'm on my way to Japan right now, but I can stop in San Francisco, fly in and come and audition. If they're any good, then yeah, I'll let you do what you want. So Chris Blackwell comes to our church. Now, remember, we're running all of this out of a church, right? We didn't want Chris to know that this was a church. So we sanitized the building. I'll never forgive myself for taking part in this tawdry thing. But we hid everything. All the Sunday school rooms were blocked off. There were partitions. All he saw was a building in a business park. All he saw was a hallway. He was carefully walked down the hallway into a large auditorium that had no crosses, no church, anything. And we put him in the front row, and all of us auditioned for him one after another, right? And it was very daunting because I realized I'm essentially in this antiseptic environment doing the same thing that you two did for him in a stinky bar in Belfast, right? Or Dublin or whatever. So we did it, and then we all got dragged into the pastor's office, and he's sitting there and is looking like a man of the world, and we're all sitting there just sort of like, oh my God, it's Chris Blackwell. What are we gonna do, you know? And he says, you guys are really good. You should be out in the, you know, on tour. You should be out playing bars all over, you know, Texas and Austin and everywhere. You should be out touring. And we said, we agree, you know. And he says, all right, I'm going to cancel my trip to Japan. I'm going to fly back to New York and draw up the paperwork, and let's see what we can come up with. Well, at the time, we all thought we were being signed to Island. What, in point of fact, our CEOs actually signed was a P&D deal, pressing and distribution. They had good lawyers at the time, but they didn't read their contract, okay? So what this essentially meant was that all Island was on the hook for was to press and distribute our label artists. They didn't have to promote them. They didn't have to even pay for it, but they were willing to as long as we stayed in the contract. So when our record came out, we hired the manager of Blue Oyster Cult, and he was going to help us do a whistle stop tour to promote it. Well, he gets on the phone with Island, and there's no one in the office because U2 had just released the Joshua Tree. Now, keep in mind, Island could barely handle that success, nor did they create it. They needed the Warner Brothers, Atco. They needed an entire operation from the mail boy all the way to all the radio people, the film people, hundreds of people to have it, to chase a success like that. Island was a boutique label of 30 people. You know, it was a beautiful dream, and it worked for reggae artists and other small artists that Chris Blackwell liked, but he was not anticipating U2 becoming a worldwide phenomenon.
Fill up with gas. Lights might glow, wind me up, but I never ever go.
So Sticks and Stones, there was one reviewer, a fan reviewer, and I will never forget this quote that he stated, and it's always stuck with me. And this is a high compliment. He said, "Sticks and Stones, it plays like a John Hughes film soundtrack. You know, The Breakfast Club, Pretty in Pink, Ferris Bueller's Day Off." He meant that as a high compliment, and I love that album. You know, Nowhere Else and Empty, and Michael, Empty was featured multiple times on the Beverly Hills 90210 television series. So how did it come to pass that MT was selected to be included in that?
Because the guy who wrote the song, Bongo Bob Smith,
Mm-hmm.
who that I co-authored it with, it was his song. And he had a group called Zoppy that our drummer Bruce Spencer played in for a while. And had a lot of connections in the music biz. And they were trying to get these songs, you know, placed in different things. And I think, what was that, ABC, the network got a hold of it through Bongo's connections. But the recording you hear on that episode is the Zoppy recording. It isn't 77's.
Okay.
You know, I only recently saw the clip of Shannon Doherty by the poolside with that song playing over the radio in the background. And I was getting these royalty checks from Spain. But it was called Every Dream Has Its Price. I'm going, I never wrote a song called Every Dream Has Its Price. That was the name of the episode of that show, because Bongo sold it. We ended up selling the song to the network for a flat fee so they could use it in perpetuity. So now, if anyone ever had a blockbuster hit, they'd make the money, not us, because I don't own it anymore.
Oh, heck, shoot.
It paid rent for a month.
Let's get to 1991's 88 album. Now, Michael, you know, two albums that I revere, live albums. Frampton Comes Alive. That's just a renowned live album. I dig it. I dig it. So, and then we get to a highly regarded live album. And this will be funny. It's, you know, the Kiss Alive album, which the live part, of course, being debatable. But those are two renowned live albums. So I placed 1991's 88 among the best live albums. And I just got to ask Michael, and the reason why I do is the quality, I mean, the energy of it and the quality of the recording. I mean, it's so pristine and punchy and a lot of energy in there. Michael, was 88, is that in one take, or was anything overdubbed for that album?
Okay, well, first of all, the reason why we did it was because our sound man, Shalom Aberly, was mixing us all over California, and the band had gotten so red hot because we were trying to get a record deal at the time. We were playing constantly, and he says, "You guys have got to document this. This is a great show." So the same stage where we auditioned for Chris Blackwell, it's the church sanctuary. We had the exit studio was way in the back of that building. Fortunately, they had the foresight to run cables from the stage to the studio when they built it. So that meant we could do a live concert there on Saturday night, like they always did, and record it. So we spent a whole week setting that up, getting line check, sound check, make sure all the channels worked. There weren't any dead channels, noisy channels. We recorded the entire concert to 24 track back in the exit studio front of a live audience that was a real audience. It wasn't fake. There were some problems during the show. That besides the, there was a few mistakes during. I can't get over it. My guitar crapped out. So half the song, the electric guitar is missing. I also had the foldback monitor too loud, so my guitar was coming in louder from there than it was from my amp. So we had phase issues. We had, a lot of technical stuff that you face, but overall, it captured us at the peak of our powers brilliantly.
Yes, it did.
It wasn't intended to be a live album until when we signed with Brainstorm. We owed them another record, and we didn't have anything ready. So I told Joe Taylor, I said, we've got this really good live concert from 1988. And he goes, no. He says, live albums sell terribly. I'm going, I think this one's going to be really good. I said, you need to hear it. In fact, I took the tapes down to Pachyderm. Dino Elefanti was ready to sign us on the spot. He heard those tapes. He just go, my God, this is amazing, right?
Yeah.
So we rented a studio, me and Steve Griffith. And I said, we got some problems in this. Let's fix them. So when it came time to fix that error where the guitar crapped out, I have the same amp, same mic, same guitar, same pedals, all of it. So we hit record, I played through it, and then we carefully grafted that in. If I made any mistakes, we fixed those. Not a lot, a few. There was one where the lead vocal was kind of wrong, or the lyrics were duffed or whatever, so I re-sang that one. And I think that was pretty much it. I mean, we just, we added a couple, couple things here and there, but for the most part, what you're getting is 90% reality.
Nice.
Maybe even more.
So let me
I'm
ask
really proud of it. It's a great record. I agree with you. I'm just man, if that was the only record I ever made, you'd bury me with that.
Well, you guys were on fire. Of course, that was still the original 77s, and of course the A Train was pushing that along. But Michael, I've got to ask, tell me this much. Now, one of my favorite 77 songs is called Wild Blue, and it's only on that album to my knowledge. Please tell me that guitar solo was absolutely live in that song.
100%.
Man, that's
one of the not. It's funny you mentioned that, because we did a Kickstarter campaign recently, which I hope you're part of, to re-release 88.
Right.
One of the bonus stretch goals was the current 77s will record those 4 new songs that never came out in the studio.
Yeah.
I wish I could show you inside my recording software how many edits it took for me to replicate that solo in the studio. And I just went, my gosh, how good did we have to be at the time where we could go up and nail something like that? And I didn't make any mistakes. And now I'm trying to do it 35 years later.
So you are
sitting here, and it looked like a bomb went off. There's like 20 takes, and there's literally notes from each take spliced all together to get it. So it's still not as good, but it's good. It's really good, actually.
So you are actually laying that down as a studio track now?
Yeah, they're all done. They're mixed. They're going to come out when you get your package in February or whatever it is. You're going to hear Closer, Where It's At, Wild Blue, Mary and the Baby Elvis, all
awesome.
re-recorded, and they're really good. I mean, oh my God, like Closer and Where It's At are just like amazing.
Yeah.
So, but it took us months and months and months to replicate what happened in 15 minutes on that stage in 1988. It took months of overdubbing and editing and chopping and flaking and forming. And it's like, I'm so intimidated by my younger self.
Yeah. Well, you guys were on fire, that's for sure. And I will say this, of course, here we are, some odd decades later since that happened. But I've often wondered, it's like, why did the 77s not record this in the studio at the time? I will say this, though, in hindsight, Kiss, they had Rock and Roll All Night off of Dress to Kill, but the the popular version, the quintessential version is the live version. The same can be said to me for Perfect Blues being on 88.
Yeah.
And Wild Blue, because Wild Blue actually, in thinking about it, in prepping for this interview, it's perfect as it is. But I am glad to be getting a studio version finally after all.
You'll enjoy it very much.
Yeah.
They're really good. Those songs are written to be played in bars. They weren't, that was part of our stage show at the time. We were playing a lot of clubs. We needed stuff that people could dance to. And I didn't feel that those songs were strong enough to be on an album. And so once we nailed it on stage and then released that, I went, I don't want to record those. They're not that good, but they did work as live songs.
Man, did they ever. My first introduction, as I mentioned, to a full 77s album was in March of 1994. I was in Galesburg, Illinois. A friend just a few months prior had played Woody for me, and the Zeppelin-esque riffs on that were just unbelievable. And I saw Pray Naked in a store in Galesburg, Illinois. I snatched it up. Not only did Woody blow me away, but this diverse atmosphere. I mean, there was Phony Eyes. There was Kites Without Strings. The Rain Kept Falling in Love. The list goes on. Michael, I found out later that Phony Eyes and Deep End, those were recorded by Mark Harmon and David Leonhardt, Mark's brother in the Strawmen. So my question being, how did you connect with Mark and Dave?
Dave was my guitar student. I taught guitar for years at the Warehouse Church to make extra money. And so was Bill Harmon. After I taught them everything I could teach them, I said, you know, you guys need to get together and form a band, because I can give you all my, you know, I could keep showing you stuff, but I said, unless you're out there actually using it, you're not going to get very far. So they hooked up and they started writing together, playing together. Eventually Bill called his brother Mark, who lived in Santa Rosa. He started coming down. They formed this group, started recording. Jimmy Abeg helped them record. And then I heard their tapes and I'm going, this is better than our stuff. And I was really depressed because our band marriage was sort of falling apart and theirs was real strong. They had a real strong, you know, close-knit thing. Mm-hmm. So I was very jealous. So when our group finally did fall apart, so did theirs. Bill quit. And so I'm looking at this and I'm going, we've got a whole studio album's worth of stuff in the can, plus a live album in the can. No band to promote it. Now I've got these guys who are doing this great band. And so I called them up and I said, let's go out and talk about some stuff. And I said, why don't you guys become the 77s? Aaron's still around. He'll play drums and we'll just keep going. And we'll, you know, I got some connections to put this stuff out. We'll have a group. And so that became the next era. Mm-hmm. It lasted about 5 years. And it was, that group produced Pray Naked and Drowning with Land in Sight. And we stole a couple of their songs for Pray Naked. We just used their masters and just overdubbed onto them, got my voice on them, my guitar.
Okay.
So it was kind of a dirty trick, but I mean, it wasn't going anywhere. It was going to waste. Mm-hmm. And I thought, why waste all this great talent and songwriting stuff? So,
well, it just blew me away, the diversity of that album, because Woody is, I mean, so heavy. It's like Led Zeppelin with modern production back then in the licks. And then we get to Phony Eyes and I'm like, where is this taking me? And then my goodness, Kites Without Strings, The Rain Kept Falling with Love. Michael, I couldn't help but falling in love with the 77s. And that's the album that made me a fan. So let me ask you this, and you kind of alluded to this, Phony Eyes and Deep End, you kind of overhauled it a little bit. I think the program drums were kept for those songs. Did the A-Train, did Aaron Smith, who, by the way, friends out there who will be watching this, Aaron the A-Train Smith drummed with the Temptations, drummed on Papa Was a Rolling Stone and Romeo Void. Michael, did Aaron play the drums on the other songs on that album?
He played on the second half. He played on Woody, Look, Nuts for You, Self-Made Trap,
I think Holy Hold was programmed, wasn't it?
Yeah, it's programmed. Yeah, I think one other one. I can't remember what it was.
So
But
how
I
did
know
how did you connect with Aaron?
Aaron was that was through Charlie Peacock. Charlie knew him because he was playing drums in the Bay Area, San Francisco area, Sacramento. And when Charlie got in Vector, they needed a drummer. They had a drummer, but they wanted more of a studio drummer. So Charlie called Aaron, they hired him. And then he eventually, he did that record. And then we needed him to go to play at some kind of conference in Wales. We were going to be there a month. And our drummer couldn't go, so we hired Aaron to go. And then when we got back, Aaron stayed with us and for 10 years.
Yeah, man. And what an awesome ride, because then in 94, we get Drowning with Land in Sight. Absolutely took no prisoners with its driving rock. I mean, friends out there, go check out Drowning with Land in Sight. Nobody's fault but mine. It was played in the style of Led Zeppelin, practically note for note, of course, with the Sevens doing what they do best. And Michael, thank you so much for crediting Blind Willie Johnson, the song that he wrote. But we got Snake and we got Snowblind. I mean, wow.
Well, most of that is Mark Harmon's influence. And anytime there's hard rock like that, that's all Mark. He's the one who wrote the Woody riff, it's like that's why it's called Woody. And Snake and Snowblind and all that. He writes all the heavy stuff. I write the more bluesy, folky stuff. And Dave,
tell me you were the Film at 11 guy.
That was Dave Lenhart, and I wrote the lyrics. Yeah, I wrote the lyrics and melody. Okay. But that's his music, yeah.
So I love the album, Took No Prisoners. We had the beautiful mezzo along with Film at 11. Michael, let me ask you about that one line in Dave's Blues, and it on the initial release on Myrrh Records, it's skewed. Was that from pressure because of the record company?
Yes. And they did that without my permission or even knowledge. They told the mastering engineer to do it. After I told them, and it's funny because those were our friends, running that division of Myrrh and all that. Mm-hmm. But they had to toe the party line. And so they secretly backmasked the word ass, which, the reason why that song was written was because Dave had gotten Hodgkin's disease and was fighting for his life. It was an angry song. Mm-hmm. And, we almost lost him, right? So I couldn't think of a better word to use at the time, but Joe Taylor called me up and says, you can't cuss on a Christian record,
It means bottom. It means butt.
Yeah, he says, you can't do that. He says, no tits, no cigarettes. And I'm going, I said, you don't get it, do you? I said, we're not doing this to be controversial or to annoy or offend people. I said, this is coming out of the depths of our heart. This is real stuff, and real people listen to this stuff. And it made me very angry. It made me realize that we probably weren't going to do very well in that Christian market because we tried to play ball. We tried to get them to sell us, market us, and they just either wouldn't or couldn't. It's like it was just a little too edgy for them, So when you call an album Pray Naked, they lost it. Our photographer went to India and had gurus and Indian holy men decorate that photograph of us for worship. We put it in Hindu temples where they were offering, offerings to idols. Word didn't even blanch at that stuff, but the word naked, just the word naked, the fact that we were telling people to pray without pretense or, a covering up, to be honest with God, they couldn't handle it, man. It's like, that should tell you everything you need to know about the CCM industry. Sure. It's like, yeah, we'll market Hinduism, but naked, no. It's a very Victorian white
Well,
culture, you know.
it's kind of the same reason they had a problem with Petra's song "Killing My Old Man," because they didn't even consider the theology that was being explored in that song. You know, they just looked at it at a surface level and didn't
well,
want
to be fair, you know, a business is a business, and if your business survives on not rocking the boat too much, you're probably not going to rock the boat too much. And I think that, you know, to be fair to them, we really didn't belong on that label in the first place. So we should have played the game a little bit more wisely, but we were young. We were, you know, we were rebellious, but only because we wanted to do something different, something cool, and not just to be cool or offensive, but to actually have it mean something. You know,
Sure.
we thought we could be a light to inspire people to get a little bit more real and, you know, get past the sort of phony Christian subculture that a lot of this stuff lives in.
Sure.
And I think that we probably succeeded as more of an inspiration than we were a commercial success. It reminds me of the story of the Velvet Underground. You know how they came out in the 60s, and of course no one wanted to know about, you know, streetwalkers and heroin and all that stuff. I mean, the mid 60s, everything was flowers and fun and, you know, love and peace, and Lou Reed singing about shooting up heroin and transvestites and all these terrible things, right? That stuff would become relevant 10 years later when the culture changed. But as a result, that group was commercially sort of anathema. But they say that of the, you know, maybe the Velvet Underground only sold 25,000 records, but every person that bought one formed a band. And in our case, everyone that bought one of ours became a pastor. I'll take it.
Yeah.
Why not?
I need to ask about when Bruce Spencer came into the fold, because Tom Tom Blues, it came in '95, great album, had a little more of a modern flair. Bruce, as I understand, I mean, singer, songwriter, multi-instrumentalist, played predominantly percussion with the 77s. Wasn't he also with Wynonna?
Well, he did tour with Wynonna for a time, yes. Bruce was in Vector first and played with Charlie Peacock quite a bit. He was very young when he came to the Exit aggregate. I toured with him with Charlie and was always very fond of his drumming. He was a lot of fun to play with. He had a lot of energy. And he would sub for Aaron when Aaron was sick or on the road, or, you know, he was our first call because he had the chops. So when Aaron moved to Nashville, we had hooked up with this company called Via that wanted to re-release our first 3 albums on CD, which they never had been. So they needed a band to tour and promote this re-release. Yes. And I said, well, the groups broke up. They said, well, can you throw something together? And I go, well, let me see. And so I said, Mark, what would we do? And I said, well, we could get Bruce, but then we'd only be a 3-piece. And I go, man, I've never done a 3-piece in my life. That's a lot of ground to cover. This is a 2-guitar band, but we didn't really have a choice. So I said, all right, we'll do it. Let's do the best. And we went out and did that tour. And when we came back, we thought, you know, this sounds pretty good, because Bruce really studied Aaron's style to try to be true to vinyl on the tour, you know. So the songs sounded closer to the original records with Bruce than they did by the time Aaron got to that point. He was, you know, be changing it up because we'd been playing it for 10 years. So we thought of, you know, well, maybe we should change the name. Let's start a new group. I wanted to call it Weathercock. And then I thought about it again and I go, you know, if we call it Weathercock, it's like we're throwing away all the work I just did to build up this band name and this thing. We've got all these fans, all this goodwill. Why not just let's just be a new 77s, see where it goes. And so once again, Joe Taylor offered us a little deal on that label, Brainstorm.
Mhm.
And we went in, and for 3 months we went in a garage and just jammed and recorded every jam. And Mark was way into Soundgarden at the time, a lot of heavy stuff. So Tom Tom Blues reflects that era where it's three of us being kind of a power trio, more aggressive, heavier sound. The record sold really well, and it found its audience. It was drastically different from anything we'd done before, but people went with it. And then, we kept doing little tours, and then we went independent and started recording on our own, put out some things. But we haven't been very prolific as a band, but we've been, we've kept our hand in, done a lot of personal appearances.
Yeah.
And with the advent then of the internet, that enabled us to form a much closer connection to our fan base. So I praise God for the internet every day, because that has made independent music the way we've been doing it all these years work for us, so that we can keep working and keep doing stuff.
Right.
Without the internet, it would have been over a long time ago.
You're a sweetheart child with your soul in your shoes. You can take me out for a permanent cruise. Won't you choose me? Come on, baby. You can't refuse. Come on and take me for a ride in your walking shoes.
I saw you in Little Rock, Arkansas,
Yeah.
and you signed this for me. You played a great acoustic show, and you signed FDR in drag, Michael Roe 77's FDR in drag. Is this truly FDR?
That's FDR in drag. They used to dress boys in girls' clothing, as particularly wealthy families did that. I'm not sure what his family was about, but of course, little boys hated it. But they would put wigs on them and dresses, and it's a cruel thing to do. Don't ask me where that started or why. I don't know if it was in certain regions of the United States. All I know is that the art director at VIA had a very well-honed sense of humor.
Mm-hmm.
And when he showed me that, I just go, "What is this? Who is this?" And he goes, "That's Franklin Delano Roosevelt." I'm going, "Oh my God, we have to use that."
So let me ask you this really quick then, sticking with this album, because initially I had the curdled version, not knowing there was an uncurdled version. I discovered the three wonderful songs, It's For You, Stelazine Prophecy, and oh shoot, the third, Sneakers. Sneakers. So Michael, this was on Via Records. Why was there a curdled version? Did they have a problem with some of the lyrics?
Yes. And originally that was, if I had known that was going to happen, I probably would have either pulled the record or done something different. I don't remember the circumstances, except that they saw fit to create one for one market and one for another. They had a secular market and a Christian market, and they were afraid, because of some of the lyrics in those three songs, that they were sexually suggestive and that they would cause trouble in the Christian bookstores yet again. So, I was horrified by this, as you can imagine. I just they're chopping up my thing. I gave them this great record, and they're mangling it and mutilating it. But, it ended up creating a sort of its own mythology. But it wasn't, I had nothing to do with it.
I got you.
I would have never sanctioned such a thing. It's all right. It's just anything to get people talking that helps sell records.
So friends, we're pressed for time, but I just really quick want to say Ain't Beautiful is on this album, and it truly is an achingly beautiful song.
That's one of my favorite things ever. Yeah.
And then another great song is from this little number here, More Miserable Than You'll Ever Be, The Treasure in You. I got to hear you play that live, and it was so wonderful.
I love that too.
So, Michael, I'd like to ask you about one album in particular,
Oh no.
and it's for you, buddy.
No,
It's
no,
for
no.
you. Talk to me.
Well, first of all, the album is great. It's the one I hand people when, if someone doesn't know me personally, you can't listen to that and not know me personally, because I'm myself on that record. Okay. It's me in all my, dumb cornball glory. Playing songs off the cuff, taking requests. Me and Dave went out and played these tours where we didn't have a set list. We just had a peachy folder full of lyrics, and I'd throw them on the floor and people would call tunes and we'd play them. And some shows were 45 minutes, some were 3 hours long. It was a lot of fun. But when it came time to do I wanted to release it as a live album, but we were working with this record company, M8, which was the absolute worst label I've ever worked with. The guy who ran it was a complete crook, maniac. It's like, I can't say enough bad about him. And as a Christian, I shouldn't, so I won't. But what I will say is that when it came time to do the record, I had a photograph of me that my mother took of me when I was 1 year old. I was naked and I was holding the phone. The phone was as big as I was, right? And I wanted to call the album "It's for You," because I'm holding the phone, right? And what could be funnier than that?
Right.
And I said, now it shows my full, business. Are you cool with this? I was only 1 year old. I mean, come on, we got Nirvana, Nevermind. That was multi-platinum. You're seeing the full episode.
Full body, yeah.
And so he says, no problem. All right. 1 week before this thing was to release, he calls me, he says, I just can't do it. I just can't do it. And I'm going, what do you mean you can't do it? I had your word that you would do this. And he says, I just can't. I can't have a naked baby in a Christian bookstore. I'm going, I knew this was going to happen, right? Well, some years prior, we were cleaning out a dumpster near our church where the studio was. And we were going through it looking, I don't know why we were doing this, but a friend of mine goes in there and he pulls out this little folder looking concern with a photograph in it. And it was this woman who's on the cover. And I go, oh my gosh. He goes, that looks like Roy Orbison's grandmother. We had a big laugh, and he took the thing and he signed it. Keep up the good work, boys. Mama Orb, and we called her Mama Orb. I had it up in my office forever. And I didn't think anything about it. So I thought, you know what? I'm going to get this guy back. I was really pissed. So I said, I know exactly what I'm going to do. Mama Orb is going to be on that cover, and we're going to create a whole mythology around her inside. We're going to write a story about how my wicked son, Roy Orb Bassoon, did these terrible things. And this, and so he was furious. It's like, I got him so good. He said, I can't put that on. I said, you're going to put that on the cover. And he was so pissed, but he did it because he was, now I had him, I'm in cahoots with a guy. He's like, he's under the time schedule, right? He's got to get the thing out. So out it went. All right. Well, I thought that would be the end of the story. I don't know whether it was a year later, 6 months later. I go to my P.O. box and there's a big fat envelope from a lawyer's office. And it was a lawsuit threatened to me by the family of this woman. Evidently, this woman went to my church, and at the time I was being managed by a lawyer, and I said, you've got to get me out of this. This is terrible. We didn't know who it was at the time. Turns out her grandson's a big fan and went into our church bookstore to buy my record and sees grandma on the cover. Okay. He brings it home, shows his mom, and of course she's naturally upset because evidently there were only 2 or 3 copies of this photograph ever made. Well, meanwhile, we had already printed up the naked baby pictures and were offering them for $2 inside the record. If you wrote in, we talked about how Mama Orb and Roy Orb Bassoon, tried to, blackmail me with this photograph, and you can have it for $2. We had all the covers made with that naked baby picture on it, right? So I said, here's what you do. You call up the family, you tell them, or you call their lawyer and say, look, Mr. Roe has already repented of this. He thought better of it, and he's already got an alternate cover made, and he's ready to send out replacements, and he'll do a cease and desist, which was another way I could get back that evil record company guy. because now I'm created a legal hassle for him, right? Okay, so anyway, the lawyer asked the family, one thing Mr. Roe wanted to know is, they said, we don't really want any trouble. We just want to know where he got that photograph. There was only 2 or 3 copies made. And the lawyer told him he found it in a dumpster. And once they heard that, they realized that they threw away that photograph of their grandmother, and they were deeply ashamed. And they dropped. That's when they just said, all right, no harm, no foul. Let's all walk away from this. Just please don't put any more out. Put another cover on it, and we'll just call it even.
Well, there you
Isn't
go.
that it could only happen to me, right?
Right. Yeah. Well, I just want to say, Michael, and I'm sure you can't see it, but all these little names that are on here.
Yes. Are you in there?
I am, and it's in all caps. It's about 3/4 of the way down. It says Cantablo the Outfamous. And that was me. Here's my proof. This is my motorcycle jacket. And if you'll notice my biker name, Cantablo.
Oh, wow.
So
that's great.
you can look in there and see Cantablo the Outfamous. I was a proud supporter of this album.
Well, I really appreciate you doing that, because that record meant a lot to me personally. I'm very proud of it, musically, performance-wise, entertainment-wise, and also just because it's again a real document of us as people. It was meant for our fans. That's why it's called It's For You. I couldn't have been more transparent on that record, and I just love that you supported it and let me share that story.
Yeah.
That's the kind of stuff you can't get away with normal record companies. And so, to that guy's credit, he was willing to put this thing out at least. So I guess I need to kind of forgive him for everything and just sort of let bygones be bygones. But
That's right.
I was just mad at the time. So, let this be a lesson that don't let the sun go down in your anger, and sin not. Be angry and sin not, because when you sin when you're angry, bad things can happen. And I created a big mess for everybody and upset Mama Orb and the whole family. And that poor kid seeing his grandma naturally he was upset. I'd be upset.
Well, Michael, I could laugh, but it's not funny, right?
No, you're right.
I'll tease it.
It's not, huh, Fred? Yes. Oh, she loves Dad. Oh, no. No. We better let this one go.
I've got time, you've got none. You know all and I know some. I fall short, you stand tall. You conceal and I show it all.
So 77s.bandcamp.com, michaelroe.bandcamp.com, also lostdogs.bandcamp.com. You can find, friends, a host of Michael Roe and 77s and Lost Dogs material not available anywhere else. And Michael, we will put that in our description. Some great solo albums from Michael Roe. Friends, these are albums I have of Michael stuff and Lost Dogs, and there's a heap down here that I put down there. So we could be here all day, but
Well, it's
quick
funny that
question.
now that I'm not coughing anymore, now the interview's over.
Michael, any plans?
Is there anything else you want to, is there any more burning questions? Because since we've taken this much time, I don't want to leave anything out.
So, well, since our friend Tim Chandler's passing, we knew and loved Tim, friends. He was the bassist with the choir and with Daniel Amos. Michael, as of late, COVID notwithstanding, you have been performing bass with the choir in live settings. Any more plans with that?
Absolutely. If they'll have me. We were supposed to go out this year and last year, and we got, as you know, the pandemic pretty much squashed live performances for a long time. And even if, see, the thing is, it's becoming real troubling right now, because it's like looking into a crystal ball. Like if we say, all right, we want to do a tour in the spring, it's already hard to get people to come out and get promoters to pull the trigger and to string a tour together that will be profitable, because every day you're out there, you're spending money on gas, food, hotels, transportation, van rental, all of that, right? So if you're not playing, you're paying. So we have to get people and promoters all on one page. Let's say a promoter wants to host a concert. Can he guarantee that every one of his people is going to show up? Can he guarantee that these people aren't fearful of being in an enclosed area? Because a lot of times we're in basements, we're in living rooms, we're in churches, you know, will they wear masks? Will they not? Are they vaxxed? Are they not? It's like, there are so many variables. And while this thing is still kind of going like this, you know, it starts to go down and then, oh, now there's a spike, you know? So it's kind of like playing the stock market during a volatile period. It's impossible to really feel secure about putting together a string of dates the way we do it. So having said all of this, I'm hoping that we can do a tour in the spring with one of our bands. I love playing bass with the choir. It's the most fun I have on the road because I can just lay back and do a great job. I don't have to carry the show. Just let those guys do it. And I could sit there and channel Tim, you know, when I can. And when I can't, just learn the part and just deliver it. I love playing bass. It's a blast. So.
Well, what about Michael? Because, you know, again, you being part of the Lost Dogs and having been with Derry for years, and of course, Steve, you know, on more recent albums of Lost Dogs, and I'd love to see a new Dogs release too. But what about perhaps being the choir's bassist and playing on a studio recording? Any talks about that maybe?
They haven't asked me to do that. They use Chris Donahue because he's local. He's the best bassist in the world, and they can get him in and get the job done. You know, that could happen, but I kind of doubt it because for them, you know, Tim was a great bassist and I know they appreciated his contribution, but a lot of times Tim's role for himself was to deconstruct and decimate whatever Derry and Steve did. Like, you know, when they would bring songs to him and you get in the studio and say, all right, now I'm going to screw it up. And that's what brought the creative tension and the sound to the band. But that's not really what they want. They want someone to play the bass part to make the song sound good.
Sure.
So they're losing a bit of that edgy creativity, but they're getting in Donahue an absolute brilliant player. So, you know, if I were going to record with them, I would probably feel obligated to take on Tim's attitude and want to be a little bit more edgy and creative with it. And it's like, that's not really where they're at. So I think, you know, they need to do what they need to do.
Sure.
And if they ever asked me to play bass, of course I would do it because, like, I love playing bass. So
sure.
I'm not a bass player, though. I've gotten better because having to tour as a bassist, that's the first time I've ever done that in my entire life. It's taught me how to think more like a bass player and, you know, use my fingers. I always play with a pick. And sometimes you want to get that thump that goes right through your gut. You can't get that with a pick. So I've had to get better at trying to play it like this, which I hate. I mean, I'm all thumbs. I go, what am I doing? You know, but it's been great. It's been, and it's, you know, we have a lot of fun touring. The three of us have a really great band marriage on the road. We do really well together. So I'm up for anything those guys want to do.
Sure. Well, I would be remiss, Mike, if we didn't mention CoROEnosphere.
Yes.
Your Patreon and your YouTube channel featuring predominantly you and Bruce, filled with music, special guest, conversation, and a good time. And I just got to say, number 83 with Michael Gregory, man, you all knocked it out of the park, brother.
Oh, yeah. That spoiled us. In fact, you know, I'm sitting here thinking about, we got to do one tonight with it. It's a Dave Lenhart show. Don't miss it. It's going to be really good.
Nice.
But
yeah.
Once we did that with Gregory, you know, because I kept asking Bruce, I said, we got to get Gregory. And he kept demurring. And now I realize, I don't even know if he was consciously doing this, but it's like, once you do that, man, it's really hard to ever not do it again.
Sure.
Because you're getting, you know, I love playing with another guitar player. I absolutely hate being the only guitarist. I hate it. And I've hated it for 25 years, and I'll keep hating it because I live for playing with, I love weaving with another guitar player, you know, the rhythm, the lead, weaving in and out, playing harmonies, playing counterpoint. I can do it by myself, but I don't like it.
Sure.
It's good for me. It stretches me and it makes me a better player, quote unquote. But that's not where I live. I really, really love the interplay of playing with another instrument. So
Sure.
we're going to have him again, and hopefully we'll get some other guys. And it is what it is. The main thing about that show is to have fun, develop a sort of persona between the two of us, give background on the songs, and just the challenge of seeing if we can get to the core of what makes that song really what it is. And so in a sense, it's a kind of deconstructive approach to doing our music. It's like, we're going to strip this down to its most base element. What's there of value? And that's kind of what we're finding when we do the show.
I may be Mr. Magoo, but I see through you, yeah.
The people want to give to you, brother.
Well, one way is to watch our CoROEnosphere show and donate there. If they wanted, the best way to give to us is to buy our music at www.77s.com, or all the other websites for all the other bands. It's like going to Bandcamp and purchasing music, whether in a physical form or a download form, is the best way to not only support our artists, but also to get the music spread around. You have it on your phone, or you play it for people and they get turned on to it, just like you did when you first heard it.
Sure.
That's what I recommend. Other ways of getting money is just desperation to me. But when you're actually selling people music that you made, that's the gift that keeps on giving. So I just encourage people to go to our website to buy our music. And also Mezzo Music Limited is the label that Mark and Bruce have, where we're featuring new music by the 77s, Vector, Strawmen, and other artists. So that's a whole new creative and financial venture that we're doing. So you can get it from a variety of sources.
I will put the links to all the connections there.
Yes,
in our
and if you need me to send you those, I'll help you any way I can, because it's very important to me that we continue to get our music out there any way we can.
And I know most of them, but if you don't mind shooting the connections to me,
No
that'll
problem.
be perfect.
Yeah, just shoot me an email. I'll get them out there, because that's really important to me personally.
You
Especially
bet.
now that the holidays are coming up, so you definitely want to fill your stocking.
You come too soon, so I'll guess what makes you wanna run away from all this. Now I hate to say that I was wrong, but I did.
Michael, in closing out, if you could make a statement to leave a lasting impression with your fans and the viewers, what would you wish to tell them?
Wow, that's a heavy thing to lay on me here at the end of this. Well, I mean, our message has been centered in two things. One is the gospel of Jesus Christ. The other is in be yourself, be authentic, because so much of the Christian world tries to, whether overtly or subtly, squeeze you into a kind of mold that isn't really who you are. And I believe that, God created all of us individually to be exactly who he created us to be. Whether it's a doctor, lawyer, Indian chief, musician, beautician, you name it. And so many people that develop a relationship with Jesus get into their church and start to feel like they now have to listen. When we were doing our music in the 80s, they felt like, I got to throw away all my secular records, listen to Amy Grant. So we saved a lot of people from Amy Grant. I love Amy Grant. She's beautiful. I love her music, but that's a real narrow vision of what it means to be a young person who's in love with music and also in love with Jesus, right? So when they found our band and other bands like us, other artists like us, they felt freed, liberated. They could be themselves. And that's been, for me personally, I've always felt that was our number one message to Christians, is that be who God made you to be and express that as colorfully and with as much integrity as you can. So that's the main deal. If you're not a Christian, of course, look into Jesus. He's got the answer. It's like I could, how do I spread the gospel? We try to just do it with our music because, that's something that's God's work, not mine. All I can do is just sort of carry a bucket of water and say, here, taste this, see that it's good,
That's right.
So that's basically it. I mean, I don't know how to sum it up in one statement, but there you go. That's the best I can give you on a afternoon in the sun with
No, that's
cigarettes.
That's really good, Michael. I like that. I'm a pastor myself, and in fact, tomorrow morning I'm going to be. The message of my sermon is, it ain't no sin to get the blues, and the thing I'm focusing on is that you can be real as a Christian. You don't have to come in there and try to be somebody you're not, and
Right.
And that's the heart of what I'm talking about tomorrow. So I appreciate what you just said there. Yeah.
Good.
I'm working on a feeling. I'm working on a feeling. I'm working on a feeling for my Lord, for my Lord. It's a Holy Ghost feeling. It's a Holy Ghost feeling.
Michael, before we completely say adios, Michael being our resident pastor, we always like to just do a scripture closeout because we believe that's the main thing. And Michael just usually reads a word. And then before we, I'll close it out. But before you completely leave, please stick around for one more moment. Okay. So.
All right.
And before I actually do the scripture, I want to say, Michael, I'm a total newbie to the 77s.
Oh,
And that's why it's good that Kent did most of the talking. He's the expert on you guys. But he introduced me, he told me to check out a few albums. And so I started listening to him. And I really like what I heard so far. So I'll definitely be listening to more.
cool.
But anyway, the scripture I decided to go with in the spirit of the name of the band was Matthew 18:21 and 22, which says, "Then Peter came to Jesus and asked, 'Lord, how many times shall I forgive my brother or sister who sins against me? Up to 7 times?' Jesus answered, 'I tell you, not 7 times, but 77 times,'" or some versions may say 70 times 7.
Mhm.
But yeah,
We were very happy about, even though that's not the origin of the band name, we're happy when people make that. We always say, what do you think it means? Because it can mean a lot of things. And when they bring that one up, that's my favorite one, because I just think that points to God's willingness to tolerate the weakness of man and the fact that we are here to forgive each other, not judge each other,
yeah.
And that's a great one. I'm really glad you pulled that one up.
Well, Michael, thank you so much for your time. And it's truly been an honor for us. I can't thank you enough. And thank you for the great music, the great message in the music. And 40 plus years, my friends. I mean, 82.
Making me feel old now.
Well, now that you're 29, right? I mean,
Yeah.
Friends, we're gonna sign off and thank you everybody for watching. And thanks again, Michael.
You bet. God bless.
Yes, sir.
All I want for Christmas is a rock and roll electric guitar. Been away with Rudolph, whizzing like a shooting star.
Hooray.
Hooray!